So Ukraine is at war. There's a recession. There's mass layoffs in companies like Meta, Amazon. So what kind of book do you read at a time when everything feels a little cold? So I went to the park library and found myself this little book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And this is what we're gonna go through today. So before I start getting into the depths of the book, I just wanted to give a short brief of what this book is all about. This book has got 98 stories in it, and it's divided broadly on 7 themes. But it's kind of like, it's what it says in the title. It's Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's heartwarming stories that will touch your heart and make you feel all nice inside. So it's a good book to read if you're feeling all, just not feeling good, I guess. So let's move on to the first part of this book, which is on love. And I know what you're thinking, this does seem like a super cringe part of the book, but out of the 98 stories, 22 stories are on this particular theme. Yeah, this is how I felt a little bit as well. I was like, really, are we gonna talk 22 stories about love? There are stories about puppies on sale, the dying wish of terminally ill patients, a judge with a habit of hugging people, a bunch of poor kids who became successful just because their teacher loved them. I mean, stories that are designed to kind of tug at your heart and make you feel like, bring a tear to your eyes. So I was looking for a few stories that had a little bit of skepticism, because I don't think life really works that way. And I actually found one in a very ordinary story. Actually, the story's name was Story for Valentine's Day, of course. It was a story about a couple who have been living together for many years now, have a kid. Well, they're a typical couple, they're just bored with each other, I guess. And suddenly the husband starts this habit of saying just a simple thank you to the wife for no good reason whatsoever, which the wife finds really odd. And I really thank the author of the book for including this skepticism, because otherwise I would have glossed over and rolled over my eyes on the story. But yeah, so the wife finds this very odd. The kids find it really odd and say that there's something wrong with that. When he keeps saying thank you for little things in the book, and he keeps doing that, and the wife keeps asking him, why are you saying that? He never replies, and it's always a mystery to her as well. At the end, the wife in this particular story says, I mean, it was irritating, but it did feel nice, and she's really glad and thankful that he kept saying thank you for the little things that she did for the family. So the essential takeaway can be summarized, I think, in 2 quotes, and I'm reading from the book. I felt more satisfied and at peace with myself than I had in a long time. I needed to learn to open my heart and give love without requiring anything in return. And the second quote, the dynamics that are required to make any relationship work, just keep putting your love out there. Yeah, it reminds me of the whole Dumbledore thing with Harry Potter. Harry, you're protected because of your power to love. Anyways, that's about on love. The second part of the book, learning to love yourself. This part of the book has like 8 stories. They're mostly stories of little kids or like homeless old ladies who are like blindly confident in themselves about what they can do in life, etc. But there was one analogy story and one set of rules for being human that was part of this particular chapter that appealed to me. Let me take you through this. The analogy story was the story of a Buddha statue somewhere in Thailand, which was covered in clay, and it had been that way for like 200 years until one day when they kind of moved the statue. They figured out that it was actually a gold statue that was covered in clay, and the myth goes that the monks had covered the gold statue with clay to protect it from the invading Burmese army. So the line in the story that appealed to me was, much like the monk with the hammer and chisel, our task now is to discover our true essence once again. Something that we kind of lose as we grow up, I think, and we lose confidence in ourselves and who we are. And the second part of this particular chapter was around rules of being human, which kind of appealed to me because they kind of made sense to look at life in this perspective. The first rule is you will receive a body. Second, you will learn lessons. Third, there are no mistakes, only lessons. A lesson is repeated until learned. Learning lessons does not end There is no better than here. Others are merely mirrors of you. What you make of your life is up to you. Your answers lie inside you, and you will forget all of this. Which is an odd way to end this, but that's those are the 10 rules for being human given by this book. So chapter 4 and 5 are more around the theme of on parenting and on learning. The on parenting part has 9 stories, which are heartwarming stories about parents who love their kids and how important it is for them to create a good, loving atmosphere for the kids. And I'm not a parent, so I couldn't particularly identify with it, but for those of you who are, please go and read that section. The next part was on learning, which I didn't think really went well with the theme of this particular book, because Chicken Soup for the Soul is more about feeling good about yourself, and learning process, I thought it would be more about people who had a learning mindset and in view of all odds, but this was more about how you can create a good atmosphere for your kids, and it was more an extension of the on learning part, I thought. So I'm gonna skip over for these 2 chapters and move on to the next part, which is probably the meatiest part of the book, which is living your dream. Now, there were 24 different stories in this particular chapter, and it's one of the most heavily buffered chapters in this book. It actually gives the book the most positive vibe of all the stories. But out of the 24 different stories, one story really stood out to me, the story of John Goddard. Now, many of you might not have heard of him, and I had never heard of him before, but he is an American adventurer, and he had a unique story to tell, wherein at the age of 15, he made a list of 127 different things that he wanted to do in life, and basically spend the rest of his life trying to achieve them. I know it's kind of weird, but it's actually true. I looked it up, and the 127 goals are not just simple goals. They're goals like climbing the highest mountains, crossing the River Nile, learning new languages, and he's done a whole lot of stuff around the goals of his. And the important thing to note is that he was not some rich guy who did not need a job, and he just spent his life doing what he could and whiling away some inherited fortune that he had got. But he actually prepared and budgeted for the lifestyle that he wanted to lead. He cut down his expenses, lived in a very small house, a very frugal car, and made sure that he prioritized his goals over everything else. So that's something to think of, especially for those of us who kind of lead our life going through life without any real goals per se, but just something to think of in this book and something to get inspired by if you read this chapter from Chicken Soup for Your Soul. The next chapter in this book is called Overcoming Obstacles, and it has 17 stories, and it's actually the second heaviest chapter in this book. While there are a lot of good stories, there was one story about overcoming obstacles that really stood out to me. This was a story of a Vietnamese man named Le Van Vu. He was born of an immensely wealthy family. His family owned roughly 1/3 of North Vietnam in terms of construction and trading properties. Unfortunately, as he was a kid, his father was brutally murdered. So he had to move to South Vietnam with his mother, where he lived there. He studied, became a lawyer. Once he became a lawyer, he gradually moved into the construction business. He established a construction business there and became really rich. But on a trip to North Vietnam, he was captured and then sent to prison. Now, this is a pretty bad place to be, but he had to kill 5 North Vietnamese soldiers to free himself, escaped back to South Vietnam, and in South Vietnam was again taken to prison because the South Vietnamese people thought that he was a spy, because how did he escape the prison so early? Finally, he was released after 2 years, then became a fisherman and went on to become an extremely wealthy fisherman in South Vietnam. However, having been in prison in South Vietnam and North Vietnam, he decided it was time to leave Vietnam eventually. And when he realized that the US troops were moving out of Vietnam, he decided to move to America. So he sold everything he had, all his possessions, everything that he had worked for, and bribed his way into getting on a boat that was going towards America. However, they only dropped him off in the Philippines. So now he's in the Philippines in a refugee camp, has no money, nothing left, no possession left in the world. But fortunately, he was able to meet the president of Philippines there and convinced him to give him a boat. With that boat, in another 2 years, he built up another fishing empire in the Philippines. Again, got rich from scratch. Then he decided, well, Philippines is not the place for him, so he had to move to America. So he sold everything off again, got on a boat to America, and at this point of time, he actually thought of committing suicide, and his wife actually saved him, saying, "What will I do without you?" And he gathered all his courage, moved to America, and landed in Houston, Texas in 1972. This man, twice rich, built an empire, lost everything, only with his wife in a new country, and he could not speak English. Fortunately, his cousin was living there, and his cousin allowed him to live in a bakery at the back of a shopping mall. He lived there for 2-3 years and scrounged his way up to become the owner of the bakery, and eventually became a millionaire in America again. So if you're feeling down, if you've been laid off, especially for those guys in the tech world, maybe you have some hope from the story that you can take, that if you put your mind to it, you can probably do it. And now, coming to the final chapter of this book, Eclectic Wisdom. It's a small chapter consisting of 10 stories, a lot of feel-good stories about just feeling gratitude in your life. One story that I can share is about a woman driving through the US freeways, and she saw a blind couple trying to cross the street. And she stopped the car, seeing the blind couple trying to cross the street. And she realized that the cars behind her and in the other lanes would not realize that they should stop, but eventually they did. And people actually got out of the car and helped the old couple cross the street. All of the people got down and made sure that the blind couple crossed the street safely. And she looked in the car wondering how lucky she was. She was crossing the car, grumbling about her life, and she realized how fortunate she was of not being that blind couple, being in that helpless state, and also the fact that there were so many people available to help when needed. Just a little bit of gratitude in this particular chapter. Right, so that's it from this book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. I really recommend it for those who are feeling not so great in life. And yeah, it's not really intellectually stimulating stories, but it'll just make you feel all warm and fuzzy while you read the book. That's it for me. See you in the next book. I don't know which one it'll be, but ciao.